The Silent Village. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The village of Black Hollow was a place forgotten by time. Nestled deep within a dense, foreboding forest, it was a place where the trees grew tall and twisted, and the air was perpetually thick with an eerie mist. The villagers were a superstitious lot, speaking in hushed tones of the old legends that surrounded their home. They warned of the Silent Ones, spectral beings said to roam the woods, luring the unwary to their doom. Eleanor had always been fascinated by the tales. As a child, she would sit by the fire, listening wide-eyed as her grandmother recounted the stories of the Silent Ones beings who had vanished centuries ago, their souls trapped in the forest, forever searching for a way to escape. But as she grew older, Eleanor dismissed the stories as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations. That was until she received the letter. Chapter 2. The Letter. The letter arrived on a cold, gray morning, the kind where the sky seemed to press down on the earth, suffocating it. The envelope was old, the paper brittle and yellowed, and the handwriting was spidery, almost illegible. It was from her uncle, a man she hadn't seen in years, inviting her to visit him in Black Hollow. Eleanor was hesitant. She had no fond memories of her uncle, and the thought of returning to the village filled her with a sense of unease. But curiosity got the better of her, and she packed her bags, determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. A part of her longed to confront the fears she had buried deep within her mind. Chapter 3. The Village. The journey to Black Hollow was long and arduous, the roads winding through the dense forest, the trees closing in around her like a living, breathing entity. By the time she arrived, the sun had set, and the village was shrouded in darkness. Her uncle's house was a crumbling, Gothic structure on the edge of the village, its windows dark and lifeless. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and the wind carried with it the faint sound of whispers, almost like voices calling her name. Eleanor knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly, and stepped inside. The interior was cold and musty, the furniture covered in dust, the walls lined with old, faded photographs. The faces in the photos seemed to watch her, their expressions strangely distorted under the dim light. She called out for her uncle, but there was no reply. The house was silent, save for the sound of her own breathing. Chapter 4. The Forest. The next morning, Eleanor decided to explore the village. The villagers were wary of her, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. They spoke in hushed tones, their words barely audible, but she caught snippets of their conversations, whispers of the Silent Ones, of the forest, of the danger that lurked within. Eleanor ignored their warnings and ventured into the forest, determined to uncover the truth. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves, and the ground was soft and spongy beneath her feet. As she walked deeper into the forest, she began to feel a sense of unease. The trees seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing longer, the air growing colder. She could hear the faint sound of whispers, though she couldn't tell where they were coming from. The voices seemed to echo her thoughts, distorting memories she had long forgotten. And then she saw them. Chapter 5. The Silent Ones. They were standing among the trees, their forms faint and translucent, their eyes hollow and empty. They were beings, their faces pale and gaunt, their clothes tattered and worn. They stared at her, their expressions blank, and then they began to move towards her. Eleanor felt a chill run through her as the beings approached, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot, her body frozen in fear. The beings surrounded her, their cold, ghostly hands reaching out to touch her. She could feel their presence, cold and malevolent, and she knew that they meant her harm. Yet in their hollow eyes, she glimpsed something else, a flicker of sadness, a silent plea. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the beings were gone. The whispers faded away, and the forest was silent once more. But their presence lingered, like a shadow etched into her mind. Chapter 6. The Truth. Eleanor returned to the village, her mind racing with questions. She sought out the village elder, an old man named Thomas, who had lived in Black Hollow his entire life. Thomas told her the truth about the Silent Ones. Centuries ago, the village had been plagued by a terrible famine. The villagers, desperate and starving, had turned to dark rituals, sacrificing their children to the forest in the hope of appeasing the spirits. But the spirits were not appeased. The children's souls were trapped in the forest, their bodies hollowed out, their spirits forever searching for a way to escape. They were angry, restless, and they sought revenge on the descendants of those who had wronged them. Eleanor realized with a sinking feeling that she was one of those descendants. The whispers she had heard weren't just echoes of the past, they were calling her home. Chapter 7. The Ritual. Thomas told Eleanor that there was only one way to free the Silent Ones, ritual that would release their souls from the forest. But the ritual was dangerous, and it required a sacrifice. Eleanor knew what she had to do. She returned to the forest, determined to perform the ritual and free the being's souls. She could no longer deny the connection she felt, the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. The ritual was complex, requiring her to gather certain herbs and objects from the forest. As she worked, she could feel the presence of the Silent Ones, their whispers growing louder, more intense. They no longer sounded menacing. They were filled with sorrow and longing. Finally, she was ready. She stood in the center of a clearing, the objects arranged around her in a circle. She began to chant the words of the ritual, her voice trembling with fear but growing stronger with each word. The air grew colder, the wind howling through the trees. The Silent Ones appeared, their forms faint and translucent, their eyes hollow and empty. Eleanor continued to chant, her voice unwavering. The beings began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air, their whispers growing fainter, replaced by a deafening silence that echoed through the forest. And then, with a final, piercing cry, the beings were gone. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. Eleanor returned to the village, exhausted but relieved. The Silent Ones were gone, their souls finally at peace. But as she walked through the village, she noticed something strange. The villagers were gone, their homes empty, their streets deserted. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the echoes of their existence. Eleanor felt a chill run through her as she realized the truth. The Silent Ones had taken their revenge, their spirits finally free to claim the souls of those who had wronged them. She was the only one left. Chapter 9. The Legacy. Eleanor left Black Hollow, never to return. The village became a ghost town, its streets empty, its homes crumbling into ruin. The forest reclaimed the land, the trees growing tall and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. But the legend of the Silent Ones lived on. Travelers who ventured too close to the forest would hear the faint sound of whispers, the cries of beings lost in the darkness. And sometimes, on a cold, dark night, if you listened closely, you could hear them too. The whispers of the Silent Ones calling out to you, begging you to come back. But beware, for once you enter, you may never leave. Epilogue. Eleanor never spoke of what happened in Black Hollow. She moved to the city, far away from the forests and the legends, but she could never escape the memories. She still hears the whispers sometimes in the dead of night. They call out to her, begging her to return, to join them in the forest. But she knows that she can never go back. The Silent Ones are a part of her now, a shadow that will follow her for the rest of her life. And she knows that one day, they will come for her. The end.